The sun was slowly sinking behind the red hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The wind moved softly through the tall grass, carrying the scent of dust and distant pine. In the middle of this wide land, two sisters walked quietly, their steps leaving small marks on the ground. Lena, the older sister, held the hand of little Naya tightly. Lena was 13, brave for her age, with long, dark hair that flowed down her back. Naya was only 9, full of life. But today, her small eyes carried a weight no child should know. They were both born in a peaceful Apache village near a river that glittered under the sun like a silver ribbon. In the early years of their lives, their world had been simple. They would rise with the sun, help their mother gather water, and listen to the elders tell stories under the stars. Naya loved to chase butterflies, while Lena loved to sit beside their grandmother, listening to old songs about brave women and kind spirits. Every evening, their father would carve wooden animals for them and remind them to be strong, to never forget who they were. But everything had changed one season. The world outside their small village was not gentle. Many groups moved across the land. Some came for trade, others for land, and some did not understand or respect the Apache way of life. Slowly, their peaceful days were replaced by fear and uncertainty. Their father no longer told stories by the fire. Instead, he sat in silence, listening to distant sounds in the night. Their mother began to pack food and blankets every evening, just in case. Even as young girls, Lena and Naya could feel something was different. One cool morning, soldiers and traders arrived near their land. The grown-ups of the village gathered to talk, their faces filled with worry. Lena and Naya hid behind a large tree, watching the serious faces of the adults. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but they knew something important was being decided. The visitors came with wagons and horses, talking fast, waving papers, and pointing toward the land around the river. Within weeks, everything the sisters had known began to disappear. Families moved, some were taken away, and the girls found themselves in a world where their language was ignored and their laughter was no longer free. One evening, when the wind grew cold, Lena and Naya were taken from the only home they had ever known. They were not alone, there were other children too. No one explained where they were going. They were placed in the back of a wagon, their small hands holding onto each other tightly as the world they knew slowly faded behind them. The journey was long and dusty. Days turned into nights, and nights turned into endless mornings. The wagon rolled over rough paths past towns they had never seen before. Lena whispered to Naya every night, "Stay strong. We will find our way home again." Even though she was scared too, Lena felt she had to protect her little sister. Naya's small head rested on Lena's shoulder as they tried to fall asleep under the open sky. Sometimes kind strangers gave them bread or water, but mostly they relied on hope to keep going. When they finally arrived at the edge of a small frontier town, it felt like stepping into another world. Wooden houses stood side by side, smoke rose from chimneys, and people in clothes very different from their own moved quickly through the streets. The sound of horses' hooves echoed everywhere. The wagon stopped near a large saloon yard, a place filled with loud voices, laughter, and music from an old piano inside. Lena and Naya looked around, confused. It was not a school, not a home, not a place for children. People stared at them as if they were something to look at, not human beings with names and stories. The sisters held hands more tightly than ever. The air smelled of hay, smoke, and something they did not recognize. A tall man with a hat looked down at them with a smile that did not feel kind. He spoke quickly with the man who drove the wagon, and then laughed loudly. The sisters were led to stand near a wooden platform in the center of the yard. A group of people began to gather, some leaning on fences, others holding drinks. A man with a big voice and a shiny belt buckle stepped onto the platform and raised his hands. He began talking loudly to the crowd. His words rolled out like a show. People cheered and laughed, as if something exciting was about to happen. Lena did not understand all the words, but she understood enough. He was talking about them, not to them. She could hear the way people responded, some with jokes, some with numbers. Naya pressed her face against Lena's arm, whispering, "What is happening?" Lena didn't know how to answer. All she knew was that something felt wrong. The platform creaked as the crowd grew. Women in long dresses stood behind men in hats, whispering to each other. Some children peeked curiously from behind their parents. It was clear that this was a form of entertainment for the town, a spectacle. Lena stood a little taller, trying to look brave. She remembered what her father had always told her. Never let fear live in your eyes. She didn't feel brave inside, but she could not let Naya see her fall apart. One kind-looking woman in a blue dress stood at the edge of the crowd, watching quietly. She did not laugh. She did not cheer. Her eyes were soft and sad, as if she understood something others didn't. Lena noticed her and felt a tiny spark of comfort, though she didn't know why. The man with the big voice kept talking, waving his hands. At one point, he stepped closer to Lena and Naya, pretending to show them off as if they were something to be taken, not living souls. The crowd clapped and whistled, not out of kindness, but out of excitement. Lena's heart pounded. She squeezed Naya's hand so tightly that Naya winced a little, but she didn't let go. The evening air grew cooler, and the sound of laughter filled the yard. It felt like time had stopped. Lena wanted to close her eyes and be anywhere else, back by the river, by the fire, hearing her grandmother's songs. She wanted to tell Naya a story to make her smile. But here there was no room for stories, only the loud voice of a man who spoke as if he owned their future. Behind the platform, a horse neighed softly, shaking its head. A dog barked near the saloon door. A group of men laughed over some joke that had nothing to do with the girls, but their voices made everything feel heavier. Lena and Naya tried to make themselves small, but there was nowhere to hide. Their clothes were simple, their hair tied back with strips of cloth. They were tired, dusty, and hungry. They didn't look like the shiny people in the crowd. But still, they stood straight because that was the only thing left they could control. The man with the big voice finally paused. He lifted a small card from his pocket, shouted a number, and waited. A man from the crowd raised his hand. Another followed. Numbers bounced back and forth like a game, but for the sisters it was no game at all. Lena's throat felt tight. She tried not to let the tears fall. Naya looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes. Lena gave a small nod, even though she didn't know how to protect her. She just knew she had to. As the bidding continued, the light from the setting sun began to fade. Lanterns were lit around the yard, throwing long shadows across the ground. It was the kind of evening that could have been beautiful somewhere else. Here, it only made the moment feel colder. Some of the people began to lose interest. Others stayed, their voices growing louder. The tall man laughed again, clearly enjoying the attention. Lena wished anyone would step forward and stop this. But the crowd was silent except for the bidding. It seemed like no one cared. The woman in the blue dress still stood there, unmoving. She whispered something to a man beside her, but he shook his head. She stepped back but kept her eyes on Lena and Naya. In that silent look there was something, pity perhaps, or a quiet promise. Lena held on to that tiny feeling like a thread of light in the dark. For a moment everything slowed down. Lena could hear her own heartbeat, feel the warmth of Naya's small hand, and see the lantern flames flickering in the wind. She remembered her father's last words before they were taken away. "You are strong, even when the world is not kind." She repeated those words inside her mind over and over again, like a shield. The crowd clapped again, and the man with the big voice shouted louder. The moment was far from over, but in Lena's heart a quiet strength was beginning to build. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know who, if anyone, would stand up for them. But she refused to let the fear consume her. She stood tall, even in a world that tried to make her feel small. And as the night crept in and the last light disappeared from the sky, a single thought filled Lena's mind. This will not be the end of our story. The lanterns around the saloon yard flickered softly in the evening air. A warm orange glow fell over the dusty ground as more townspeople gathered to watch. The night sky was slowly turning deep blue and the stars began to shine one by one, but no one was looking at the sky. All eyes were fixed on the small wooden platform where Lena and Naya stood, holding hands tightly. The tall man with the big voice, the one who acted as if the whole world belonged to him, raised his hand again. His hat tilted slightly to the side and a wide grin spread across his face. He shouted more numbers, calling to the people in the crowd, making everything sound like a game or a show. His voice was strong and smooth, like a salesman trying to make people buy something shiny. But this was no game for Lena and Naya. They were not objects. They were sisters, two young souls tired and far from home. Naya Naya tried to hide behind Lena's arm. She was small, with round cheeks and gentle eyes, but tonight, those eyes were full of worry. She whispered softly, "Lena, why are they looking at us like this?" Lena didn't have an answer. She squeezed her little sister's hand, a quiet promise passing between them without words. "I'm here," Lena whispered back. "I won't let go." The man with the loud voice waved his arm dramatically toward the crowd as if inviting a big moment. That was when a man stepped forward from the group. His steps were uneven and his boots dragged against the ground. The crowd turned to look at him. He was holding a tin cup, the smell of strong drink around him, and his hat hung low over his eyes. His cheeks were red, and his words came out slower than the others. His laughter broke through the soft music from the piano inside the saloon. People around him began to cheer and clap. The man raised the tin cup in the air and shouted something, a number that made the tall man on the platform smile even wider. The crowd reacted as if something exciting had happened. The loud man repeated the number for everyone to hear. It was clear to Lena, even if she didn't understand everything, that this man was trying to take them away. Naya moved closer to her sister, almost hiding behind her back. The man with the tin cup stumbled forward a little more, still laughing to himself. Some people in the crowd laughed too, not because it was funny, but because they enjoyed watching anything that felt like a show. Others just stayed quiet, watching with blank faces. Lena's heart pounded faster. She could feel it in her chest like a drum. Her breath came out shaky, but she kept her chin up. She remembered her father's words. "No matter what happens, don't let fear speak louder than your spirit." So she stood a little taller, even though her legs were shaking. The tall man with the big voice pointed toward the man with the cup, repeating the number once more. The crowd responded with whistles and claps. It was almost like a performance to them. Lena could feel Naya's small hand trembling in hers. She leaned down slightly and whispered again, "Don't be scared. I'm here." The man with the cup was now standing very close to the platform. His boots made soft scraping sounds in the dust. His smile was wide but empty. Lena could see his eyes, tired and unfocused. He didn't look kind. He didn't look like someone who cared. To him, it seemed, this was just something to do, just another night in town. The crowd began to murmur. Some people shouted more numbers while others cheered the man on. The tall man on the platform lifted his arms, enjoying the growing excitement. The sisters stood there, feeling smaller with every cheer that rose into the air. At that moment, Lena thought about their home again. She thought about the river that glittered like silver under the sun, about their mother braiding Naya's hair in the morning light, about her grandmother's songs. She wished she could close her eyes and be back there. But this wasn't a dream she could wake up from. This was real. The man with the cup raised his hand as if to say, "I win." The tall man nodded, pleased with himself. The crowd clapped louder, and for a brief second, Lena felt like the air around her had grown heavier. She squeezed Naya's hand even tighter. Naya's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She trusted Lena too much to let go. Just then, something small but strange happened. The woman in the blue dress, the one who had been watching quietly at the edge of the crowd, stepped forward. She didn't shout, she didn't wave her hands, but her movement caught Lena's attention. The woman's eyes were kind, filled with worry, not excitement like the others. She whispered something to the man beside her. He shook his head, but she didn't step back. Her presence felt different, like a quiet breeze in the middle of a storm. The man with the cup stumbled again, waving his tin cup as if celebrating something only he understood. The tall man clapped his hands together once, a sound that echoed sharply through the night. It sounded like a signal. Two other men moved closer to the platform. They didn't look at the sisters kindly either. Lena took a small step back, bringing Naya with her. Her heart beat faster. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew it wasn't good. The crowd grew louder, some laughing, some whispering. The piano inside the saloon stopped playing for a moment, and even the horses tied near the fence shifted their feet uneasily. The lantern light flickered again, making everything feel strange, like a bad dream that wouldn't end. Lena's thoughts raced. She had no plan, no clear way out. But deep inside, she had a feeling that not everything was lost. Maybe someone would step forward. Maybe someone would care. Her eyes moved through the crowd, searching for any sign of help. That was when she noticed a man standing near the back of the crowd. He was taller than most of the others, wearing a plain coat and a hat pulled low. He wasn't cheering and he wasn't laughing. His arms were crossed over his chest and his eyes were fixed on the scene in front of him. His face was calm but serious, like someone who didn't like what he was seeing. Lena didn't know him, but something about the way he stood made her heart beat a little differently, not with fear this time, but with a quiet hope. He didn't look away when their eyes met. For the first time that night, Lena didn't feel completely invisible. Meanwhile, the tall man shouted again, making it clear that the man with the tin cup had made the highest offer. The crowd responded with a mix of claps and whistles. It felt like the moment was already decided. Naya whispered, "Lena, I want to go home." Her voice was small and soft, almost lost in the noise. Lena knelt down slightly and looked at her little sister's tearful face. She gently placed both hands on Naya's cheeks and whispered, "We will, I promise. You just have to stay strong with me." She smiled, not because she felt like smiling, but because she wanted Naya to believe it. The tall man raised his hand, ready to finish what he had started. But the quiet man at the back didn't move. He stayed where he was, watching every second carefully. The woman in the blue dress stepped a little closer too, whispering again to the man next to her. It was like small ripples in a big storm, too soft to stop the noise but strong enough to be felt. The man with the cup threw his head back and laughed loudly, shaking the cup in the air. People cheered again. The air grew thicker, the night grew colder, and the sisters stood there holding on to each other like two small lights refusing to go out. Lena felt something strange inside her chest, a mix of fear and strength. She didn't know what would happen, but she wasn't going to let Naya see her break. Her father's words echoed again in her heart. Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you keep standing even when you are. The tall man looked proud, the drunk man looked pleased, the crowd looked entertained, but somewhere among them were two people who weren't laughing, a woman with kind eyes, a man with quiet strength, and somewhere deep down, Lena knew that this moment, this exact second, would change everything. The lantern flames swayed in the wind. The sound of boots on dust, whispers, and soft laughter filled the air. But beneath all that noise, something was shifting. It wasn't loud yet. It wasn't clear. But it was there, the feeling that someone might just step forward. And as the tall man opened his mouth to speak again, Lena lifted her chin and stood taller than she ever had before. She didn't know what the night would bring, but she had decided one thing already. She would not give up. The night in the small town was growing colder. The warm glow from the lantern spilled across the saloon yard, lighting up the faces of people who had gathered. The crowd's laughter and chatter mixed with the creaking of the wooden platform where Lena and Naya stood, side by side. Their hands were still locked together, not just because they were scared, but because their hands were the only thing in this strange place that felt safe. The man with the tin cup, the one who had stumbled forward earlier, still stood in front of the platform, waving his hand as if this moment was a kind of entertainment. Around him, some people whispered and laughed, but others had begun to shift their feet. The excitement was not as loud as before. Something in the air had changed. Perhaps it was the way Lena stood so still and quiet, her chin slightly lifted, her eyes fixed ahead. Perhaps it was the tall man at the back of the crowd, the one who wasn't cheering or laughing. Lena's heart was beating fast. She could hear it in her ears like soft drums. Every sound around her, footsteps, whispers, the neighing of a horse, felt louder. Naya squeezed her hand and Lena gave a small squeeze back. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her silence said everything. "I won't leave you, no matter what." The tall man on the platform, the one running the auction, kept talking loudly. He smiled at the crowd, trying to bring back the loud energy from before. He clapped his hands together and shouted another number. The man with the tin cup laughed and raised his hand again. The crowd reacted. Some clapped. Some just watched. But this time, Lena noticed something different. A few faces in the crowd looked uncertain. Their smiles had faded. The woman in the blue dress was still there. She had moved closer to the front now. Her eyes were soft but strong. She didn't speak, but her face showed something that Lena had not seen all evening. Quiet disapproval. She looked at Lena and Naya not like they were part of a show, but like they were two children who needed someone to care. Lena held that look in her heart, like a small light in a dark night. The tall man continued to shout, but the mood around him was changing slowly. Lena didn't understand everything being said, but she could feel the shift. She had learned to read faces. Back in her village, her grandmother had told her, "People's eyes speak before their mouths do." And now as she looked around, Lena could see that some eyes in the crowd were no longer full of amusement. They were uneasy. Naya's small fingers tightened around Lena's. She whispered softly, "Are we going home, Lena?" Her voice was trembling like a leaf in the wind. Lena bent down slightly so she was at her sister's level and whispered, "Not yet. But I'm here. We'll face everything together." Naya nodded, trusting her big sister completely. The tall man on the platform clapped his hands again, trying to make the crowd cheer. He called out to the man with the tin cup, who laughed louder, his voice breaking through the night air. But then something unexpected happened. A voice came from the back, a firm voice, not loud but clear enough to be heard. "No more." The crowd turned around. It was the tall man who had been watching quietly all along. He stepped forward slowly, his boots pressing into the dusty ground with each step. He wasn't smiling and he wasn't laughing. He simply walked with calm strength, as if he had made up his mind before even speaking. Lena didn't know who he was, but something inside her stirred. His voice didn't sound like the others. It wasn't full of jokes or greed. It was steady. The crowd grew quiet like a soft wind had passed through it. Even the man with the tin cup stopped laughing for a moment and turned to look at him. The tall man reached the front and looked up at the platform. His eyes didn't wander. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked directly at Lena and Naya. His face wasn't full of pity, but something else, respect. As if he saw them not as part of a spectacle, but as human beings. The auctioneer, trying to keep control of the moment, laughed and said something loudly to the crowd. He tried to make the tall man look like just another troublemaker. But the man didn't back away. He stepped closer. His voice, calm and clear, filled the air again. "This isn't right," he said simply. The crowd shifted. Some looked away. Some whispered. The woman in the blue dress straightened her back and watched closely. The man with the tin cup frowned, confused, then laughed again as if trying to brush it off. But the tall man didn't laugh. He stood firm like a tree in a storm. The tall man with the loud voice tried to wave him away, but the newcomer didn't move. He folded his arms across his chest and said something again, soft but strong. Lena didn't understand all the words, but she understood enough. He was standing up for them. For the first time that night, hope didn't just feel like a whisper. It felt real, but the struggle wasn't over. The man with the tin cup stepped forward, talking loudly, pointing at the girls. He looked annoyed, like someone whose game had been interrupted. The auctioneer also spoke louder, waving his hands, trying to bring back the energy of the crowd. The quiet man didn't shout back. He just stood calmly, and his calmness was louder than their noise. Lena's heart raced again. She didn't know who this man was or why he cared, but her chest filled with something warm. She took a small breath and stood a little taller. Naya's face lit up just a little, like a tiny flame flickering in the darkness. The woman in the blue dress took another step forward, too. She whispered something to the people around her. A few nodded, a few didn't, but it was enough to make others look uncertain. What had seemed like fun to some was starting to feel wrong, and once that feeling spreads in a crowd, everything changes. The tall man spoke again, louder this time, not angry, not shouting, just clear. The auctioneer tried to respond, but his voice didn't sound as confident anymore. A few people in the crowd had stepped back. Others were just watching quietly now. The woman in the blue dress called out something. Her voice wasn't strong, but it was brave. For the sisters on the platform, everything felt like it was happening slowly. The stars above shined brighter now. The air was cooler, but Lena didn't feel so cold anymore. She didn't know what the next moment would bring, but the silence of the crowd told her something important. They weren't alone anymore. The auctioneer raised his hands, trying to convince the crowd again, but the energy wasn't the same. The man with the tin cup muttered to himself, his smile slowly disappearing. The tall man in front of the platform didn't move an inch. His calm presence filled the space more than any loud voice could. Lena glanced at Naya and whispered softly, "Someone's here." Naya nodded, a tiny spark of hope shining in her eyes. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew something was different now. Someone had stood up. Still, the struggle stretched on. Words went back and forth between the tall man, the auctioneer, and a few others. Lena couldn't follow every word, but she could feel the weight of it. This was not an easy fight. This wasn't something that would end with one word. But the tall man didn't give up, and neither did the woman in the blue dress. Their quiet strength began to pull the attention of the crowd. One by one, the laughter disappeared. The whispers grew louder. Some people even began to walk away, realizing they didn't want to be a part of what was happening. A few others stayed but no longer looked entertained. The man with the tin cup mumbled something and looked around, as if unsure whether to stay or leave. Lena and Naya stood together, their hands still locked. For the first time since they arrived in that town, they didn't feel invisible. Someone had seen them. Someone had spoken. The air felt different now, less heavy, more alive. The auctioneer's loud voice grew thinner as more people stopped cheering. It was as if the noise had lost its power. The tall man at the front didn't have to shout. His quiet refusal was stronger than the crowd's earlier excitement. The night sky was fully dark now, filled with bright stars. A soft breeze blew through the saloon yard, lifting tiny clouds of dust. Horses shifted their feet and snorted softly. The woman in the blue dress looked at Lena and gave her the smallest nod, a silent promise. The struggle wasn't over yet. But something important had happened. The girls weren't alone anymore. Someone had stood up, and that changed everything. Lena lifted her chin, not because the danger had passed, but because she felt something strong inside her for the first time that night. Her father's words came back to her like a warm blanket. Even a single flame can push back the dark. She believed it now. She felt it. This night was not just about fear anymore. It was about standing. And someone had decided to stand. The night was quiet now, except for the sound of boots shifting in the dust and the soft creak of the wooden platform. The loud laughter that had filled the saloon yard earlier had slowly faded, replaced by a strange stillness. Even the wind felt different, like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Lena and Naya still stood on the platform, their hands locked tightly. The tall man who had spoken up moments ago stood firmly in front of the crowd. His presence alone had changed everything. He didn't wave his arms or shout like the others. He didn't treat the night like a game. He simply stood with quiet strength, and that was enough to make everyone listen. The auctioneer tried to bring the crowd's attention back to himself. He lifted his hands high, speaking louder, trying to sound as confident as before, but his voice no longer carried the same weight. The crowd's energy was no longer with him. Their smiles had faded. Some looked uncertain. Some looked away. Others glanced at the tall man, wondering what he would do next. The man with the tin cup, the one who had tried to claim the sisters, shifted uncomfortably. His grin was weaker now. The people who had cheered with him earlier were no longer clapping. He glanced around as if he wasn't sure what to do. His loud laughter had disappeared completely. The woman in the blue dress stood near the front, her hands folded calmly in front of her. She didn't speak, but her quiet expression said enough. She was not afraid. She was not impressed by the loud man. She was watching closely, ready to act if needed. Lena could feel the change. She didn't understand every word spoken between the men in the crowd, but she understood something deeper. It was in the way people's eyes shifted, the way their voices had lowered, the way the tall man stood like a wall between her and the rest of the world. Something inside her chest warmed, not because everything was safe yet, but because it finally felt possible. The tall man lifted his hand slightly, not in anger, but with calm authority. His voice came out steady. "Enough," he said again, a little louder this time. The sound cut through the silence like a clean line. The auctioneer tried to argue. His hands moved quickly and his voice grew sharper. But the tall man didn't step back. He stood with both feet planted firmly in the ground, like a tree that had grown strong through many storms. His calmness was louder than the auctioneer's words. The woman in the blue dress stepped closer, finally speaking too. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and steady. She said something that made a few people in the crowd nod slowly. Her words carried kindness and, more importantly, truth. Lena didn't know what she said, but it made the auctioneer pause for a second. Even a pause was a victory. The man with the tin cup tried to speak, but his voice stumbled. The people who had laughed with him earlier didn't laugh now. A few even stepped away, no longer wanting to be near him. For the first time that night, he looked unsure. The tall man pointed toward the platform, his voice firm but calm. The auctioneer shook his head, trying to hold his ground, but his confidence was slipping like sand through his fingers. The tall man didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply spoke, and every word sounded final. A soft breeze moved through the yard, lifting tiny swirls of dust. The lantern flames flickered. Lena's heart raced. She didn't know exactly what was being said, but she could tell this was the turning point. The moment where everything could change. Naya pressed her forehead against Lena's arm, whispering softly, "What's happening?" Lena didn't have a clear answer, but she whispered back, "Someone is helping us." The woman in the blue dress took another step forward. She raised her chin and spoke again, this time looking directly at the auctioneer. Her voice was strong, like the sound of water moving over stones. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was standing up too. The crowd slowly began to shift. People who had once been entertained were now quiet. Some nodded in agreement with the tall man. Others whispered softly among themselves. What had started as a show was becoming something different, something serious, and the auctioneer could feel it. The power he thought he held was slipping away. The tall man finally stepped closer to the platform. The wooden boards creaked softly under his boots. He stood at the edge and looked up at Lena and Naya. His eyes were kind but firm. He didn't smile, but there was something steady in his gaze that made Lena believe he wasn't going to walk away. He spoke gently to the girls, not loudly, but enough for them to hear. Lena didn't understand every word, but she recognized the tone, a tone she had not heard since the day she left home. It was the tone of someone who didn't see them as less, but as people who mattered. The auctioneer stepped between them quickly, trying to keep control of the situation. But the tall man didn't flinch. He spoke again, his voice now firm as stone. The woman in the blue dress moved closer too, standing near the front of the crowd. She crossed her arms, and her calm strength added to the moment. Someone in the crowd clapped softly. It wasn't loud, just a single pair of hands. Then another person joined in. It wasn't a cheer like before. It was different, a sign of support. The auctioneer froze. The drunk man stepped back, and the tall man didn't even need to turn around. His quiet strength was speaking louder than any of them. The woman in the blue dress lifted her chin a little higher. She spoke again, her voice calm but strong, making it clear she stood with the tall man. More people in the crowd began nodding. A few others who had been silent all along now spoke softly too. It was like the night itself had chosen a side. Lena could feel her breathing slow. She didn't know the words, but she could feel the shift in the air. For the first time since stepping into that town, the crowd was no longer against her. Many of them were with her. She squeezed Naya's hand. Naya looked up at her with wide, hopeful eyes. For the first time that night, Lena whispered something that she actually believed. "We're going to be okay." The auctioneer tried one last time to speak over them, his voice louder now, almost desperate. But the crowd wasn't with him anymore. The tall man raised his hand and spoke once more, calm and steady. The crowd responded with a soft murmur of agreement. The drunk man, seeing that no one supported him anymore, lowered his head and slowly backed away from the platform. The lantern light touched everyone's faces softly. The tension that had once filled the air began to melt away like snow under the sun. The woman in the blue dress took another step forward, gently reaching toward the platform. Her eyes were warm and kind. She didn't need to say much. Lena could see everything in her face: safety, promise, care. The tall man extended his hand slightly toward Lena, not to force her, but to offer her a way down. His hand was steady. His voice was gentle. Lena looked at Naya. Naya's small fingers squeezed hers. And slowly, carefully, Lena took a small step toward the edge of the platform. The crowd remained quiet. No one shouted. No one laughed. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath. The tall man helped Lena and Naya step down from the platform, one small step at a time. When their feet touched the ground, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in weeks, a sense of safety. The woman in the blue dress came closer and knelt in front of Naya. She smiled softly, not forcing any words, just letting the little girl know she was safe. Naya hesitated at first, then hid behind Lena's leg, peeking out shyly. The woman didn't push. She just stayed there, a warm presence in the cool night. The tall man turned toward the auctioneer, his expression calm but unshakable. He said something final. The auctioneer didn't respond. He knew the moment was no longer his. The crowd had made its choice. People began to step back, some walking away quietly, others nodding at the tall man as they passed. The night wind grew softer, wrapping around Lena and Naya like a gentle blanket. The stars shined brighter above the saloon yard as if the sky itself was breathing again. The noise, the laughter, the cheers, and all of it was gone now. Only a quiet peace remained. The tall man turned back to the sisters, his voice soft again. The woman in the blue dress joined him, standing by his side. They didn't make big promises. They didn't speak in loud voices. They simply made the girls feel seen, really seen, for the first time in a long time. Lena wrapped her arm around Naya's shoulders. Naya leaned into her, resting her head against her sister's side. They didn't know exactly what would happen next, but they knew one thing for sure. They weren't alone anymore. Someone had chosen to stand up for them. Someone had turned the night from something dark into something filled with hope. As the crowd slowly disappeared into the night, the lanterns flickered softly, casting warm light on the ground. The tall man and the woman in the blue dress stood near Lena and Naya, making sure they didn't have to face anything alone again. The wooden platform, which once felt like a trap, now stood empty behind them. It was just a stage, but what had happened on that stage tonight would change everything for the sisters. It was the moment when silence had been broken by courage, and courage, even when quiet, can be stronger than any noise. The night that had once felt so heavy slowly began to fade into calm. The lanterns around the saloon yard burned low, their warm light spilling across the dusty ground like golden paint. The loud crowd that had gathered was now gone. The platform where Lena and Naya had stood was quiet and empty. It was hard to believe that only a short time ago the place had felt so cold and frightening. Now it felt like a different world. Lena stood beside Naya, her hand gently resting on her little sister's shoulder. The tall man who had stepped forward to help them stood nearby, quiet but strong, like a wall of protection they didn't know they needed. Beside him, the woman in the blue dress knelt down, softly brushing dust off Naya's dress with gentle hands. She didn't speak too much. She didn't need to. Her kindness was clear in every movement. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of pine trees from far beyond the town. The stars above were shining bright, like thousands of little candles lighting the night sky. For the first time in weeks, Lena didn't feel like running. She didn't feel like the world was closing in on her. She felt something she had almost forgotten: safety. The tall man turned toward the sisters and spoke softly. His voice wasn't loud, but it was steady and kind. Lena didn't understand every word, but she understood the feeling. It was the feeling of someone who meant to protect, not harm. He looked at her the way her father used to, with quiet trust, as if he knew she was stronger than she realized. The woman in the blue dress reached into her shawl and pulled out a soft wool blanket. She gently wrapped it around Naya's small shoulders, tucking it in carefully like a mother would. Naya didn't speak. She just held onto the edges of the blanket and leaned against Lena's side, her eyes half closed from exhaustion. They began to walk slowly away from the platform, their steps soft on the cool ground. The town, which had felt so overwhelming earlier, now seemed quieter. Lanterns in windows flickered softly. Horses shifted in their stalls. A few people who had stayed behind nodded at the tall man as they passed. No one shouted. No one laughed. The night had changed. Lena held Naya's hand tightly as they walked through the narrow street. She didn't know where they were going, but she trusted the tall man and the kind woman. Their steps were steady and their presence made the night feel less frightening. Lena looked down at Naya, who was wrapped in the wool blanket, her little feet shuffling along the ground. As they reached the edge of town, they stopped near a small house. It wasn't big or fancy. It had a porch with a wooden bench, a light glowing softly from the window, and a smell of bread in the air. It felt warm. Not like the saloon yard, not like the dusty roads they had been dragged along. It felt like a place where the world slowed down. The tall man gently opened the wooden gate, and the woman in the blue dress motioned for the girls to follow. Lena hesitated for just a second. She had learned to be careful, to not trust too easily. But when she looked into the woman's eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time: kindness without expectation. She stepped forward, pulling Naya gently with her. Inside the house, the air smelled of fresh bread and clean water. A small fire burned softly in the corner, warming the room with a golden glow. A wooden table stood in the middle with 2 chairs. The woman guided them to a soft rug by the fire and helped Naya sit down. She poured warm water into a bowl and gave them cloth to wipe their hands and faces. The simple warmth of the room felt like a gift. Naya leaned against Lena, her head resting on her sister's shoulder. Her small body finally relaxed after days of fear and travel. Lena brushed a hand through her little sister's hair gently, her heart heavy but soft. For the first time, they weren't outside in the cold. They weren't surrounded by strangers who didn't care. They were in a home, not their home, but a home where the night couldn't hurt them. The woman gave them warm bread and a cup of milk. Lena hesitated for a moment before taking a small bite. The bread was soft and fresh, and the warmth spread through her like sunlight. Naya's eyes lit up as she took her first sip of milk. It was a small thing, but to them it felt like a miracle. The tall man sat quietly at the table, not saying much. His presence alone was enough. He wasn't watching them like they were strangers. He was watching over them like someone who had already decided to protect them. Lena didn't know why he had stepped forward that night. She didn't know his story, but she knew his heart had spoken louder than the crowd's noise. When the sisters finished eating, the woman brought out 2 folded quilts and laid them gently on a small bed in the corner of the room. She motioned for the girls to lie down. Lena helped Naya get under the quilt, tucking her in just like their mother used to do. Naya's eyes fluttered sleepily. She whispered softly, "Lena, are we safe now?" Lena brushed a strand of hair from her sister's forehead and whispered, "Yes, we're safe." For the first time, it wasn't just something she said to make Naya feel better. She truly believed it. As Naya drifted off to sleep, Lena lay beside her, still holding her hand. She stared at the flickering firelight on the wall. She thought of their village, of their father, their mother, the songs by the river. Her heart ached, but it was a soft ache, no longer a sharp one. Something inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, they would find their way home again. The tall man and the woman in the blue dress sat quietly on the porch, talking softly while the girls rested. They didn't talk about the crowd or the noise from earlier. They talked about how to help. The tall man had seen enough wrong in his life, and this time he had chosen not to stay silent. The woman, who had watched with quiet strength, had chosen to step forward too. Together, they had changed the course of 2 young lives that night. Over the next few days, Lena and Naya stayed in the little house by the edge of town. Each morning, the woman would make them warm porridge and tea. Each afternoon, she brushed Naya's hair and taught her how to say simple words in her language. Naya would giggle softly at the new sounds, slowly beginning to smile again. Lena helped with small chores, carrying water, folding quilts, sweeping the porch. It wasn't their old life, but it was a safe one. A gentle one. The tall man came and went, speaking with people in town. He didn't tell Lena everything, but she could see in his calm eyes that he was making sure no one would harm them again. The crowd that had once watched their pain had now been forced to face their silence, and some had even started to feel regret. A few townsfolk even brought bread or clothes for the girls. Kindness, like the stars in the sky, had begun to spread slowly. Lena and Naya began to find small moments of peace again. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, wrapped in warm blankets, watching the sunset paint the sky in pink and orange. Naya would hum the songs their grandmother had taught them, and Lena would close her eyes, letting the sound fill her heart. One evening, as the wind moved softly through the fields, the tall man knelt in front of them and spoke gently. He explained slowly and carefully that they would be reunited with people from their community. He promised they would not be alone again. Lena didn't need to understand every word to know what he meant. His eyes carried the truth. Naya's face lit up when Lena whispered to her what he said. She clapped her small hands and hugged her sister tightly. Lena held her close, tears filling her eyes. Not from fear this time, but from a quiet joy. It had been so long since they'd felt hope like this. Days later, a small group arrived to take them back toward their people. The woman in the blue dress knelt down to hug Naya gently. The tall man placed a soft hand on Lena's shoulder, looking at her with quiet pride. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His actions had already spoken the loudest words of all. Lena and Naya climbed into the wagon, this time not as lost children, but as sisters heading toward a future they could believe in again. As the wagon rolled forward, Lena turned back to look at the tall man and the kind woman one last time. They waved softly. She would never forget their faces. Not because of grand gestures, but because of the simple, steady way they stood for what was right. The road ahead was long, but Lena no longer feared it. She had her sister beside her. She had strength inside her, and she carried the memory of the night someone stood up, not with anger, but with quiet courage. Years later, people would still remember that night in the small town, not because of the loud crowd, but because of the moment everything changed. They would remember the two sisters who were given a second chance, the tall man who chose to act, and the woman in the blue dress who stood quietly but firmly for what was good. And Lena, who had once stood on that wooden platform with fear in her heart, would grow up to be a woman who stood for others too. She never forgot the power of one kind voice. She never forgot the warmth of one safe night. The stars above shined brightly just as they did on that night, but now they no longer felt distant. They felt close. They felt like home.